I stood at the edge of the terrace, watching my former fiancé's engagement party unfold 3 floors below. The champagne towers sparkled under fairy lights, and somewhere in that crowd, Adrian was probably holding her hand, Natalie's hand, explaining to curious relatives how they'd found each other just months after our wedding was supposed to happen. I didn't feel the urge to go down there. I didn't feel the knife twist of betrayal that would have destroyed the old me. I simply observed, the way you might watch a play you'd already seen, knowing exactly when the actors would stumble over their lines. The breeze caught my hair and I turned away. I had a flight to catch in 4 hours. In my first life, I spent 28 years trying to be enough. I was born the second daughter to the Montgomery family, a name that carried weight in San Francisco's tech and finance circles. My sister, Vivienne, was 4 years older, and from the moment I could understand language, I understood hierarchy. She was the sun. I was permitted to orbit. Vivienne had our mother's elegant bone structure and our father's sharp business mind. She graduated top of her class at Stanford, spoke 3 languages fluently by 18, and had a way of commanding a room that made even our father defer to her judgment. When she smiled, people felt chosen. When she frowned, they felt erased. I was the softer daughter, the one with potential that needed development. I played piano because Vivienne played violin. I studied business because Vivienne made it look effortless. I joined the family company as a junior analyst while Vivienne sat on the board at 25. Chloe is such a sweetheart, they'd say at family gatherings. Not quite as sharp as Vivienne, but very sweet. Sweet. That word became my prison. Our mother reinforced it at every opportunity. When Vivienne won awards, Mother would turn to me with that particular smile, the one that meant I was about to be comforted for something I hadn't yet realised I'd lost. "Your sister works so hard," she'd say, "but you have other qualities, darling. You're kind. That matters too." Kind, sweet, supportive. These were the words that defined me, the box I was kept in, and I accepted it because I didn't know there was any other option. Family dinners were performances where Vivienne held court and I played audience. She'd talk about mergers, acquisitions, international deals. Our father would lean forward, engaged, asking pointed questions that sharpened her thinking. When I tried to contribute, some insight from my own work, some observation I thought was valuable, he'd nod absently. "That's nice, Chloe," he'd say before turning back to Vivienne. I learned to stay quiet. I learned that my role was to listen, to admire, to make Vivienne feel brilliant by comparison. And I played that role flawlessly for over 2 decades. Adrian Chen Li entered my life when I was 24. He was a rising architect, brilliant and intense, with eyes that seemed to see through pretense. We met at a charity gala where I was representing the company, and he asked me about the building's structural flaws instead of my dress. For the first time, someone seemed interested in what I thought, not how I compared. We dated for 2 years. He met my family exactly twice. Both times, Vivienne was travelling, and I told myself that was coincidence. He proposed on a quiet beach in Monterey, no grand gestures, just honesty. "You're the only person who makes me feel like I can be still," he said. I believed him. I believed that someone had finally chosen me first. The wedding was planned for spring, 6 months of preparation, during which Vivienne suddenly returned from her extended stay in Singapore. She'd been building a new division for the company, and her success had made our father more insufferable than ever with pride. "I wouldn't miss my baby sister's wedding," she said, hugging me with that perfect pressure, tight enough to seem warm, loose enough to feel conditional. She offered to help with planning. She knew a better caterer, a better florist. She had thoughts on my dress, maybe something more structured. "You want to look sophisticated, not just pretty." I accepted every suggestion, grateful she was taking interest, ignoring the way each change made the wedding feel less mine and more like something she was directing. Adrian started working late, then later, then he'd forget to call. When I asked if everything was okay, he'd smile distractedly. Just a big project. You know how it is. I knew how it was. I'd spent my life knowing how it was. How I ranked, where I stood, what I was worth. Vivian started visiting our apartment more often. She'd bring wine, expensive bottles she knew Adrian liked. They'd talk about architecture and design while I cleaned up after dinner. Once, I came back from the kitchen to find them laughing at some private joke, their heads close together, and when I asked what was funny, they both said nothing in unison, then laughed again. I felt something crack inside me, but I plastered it over with understanding. They were just connecting as friends. It was good that my sister and my fiancé got along. 3 weeks before the wedding, I found them. I'd gone to drop off Adrian's favourite coffee at his office, a surprise because he'd been so stressed. His assistant said he wasn't there, but I knew he kept late hours. I went up anyway, using the key he'd given me. The lights in his private office were dimmed. I heard her laugh first. Vivian's laugh, the one she used when she wanted someone to feel special. Then I heard his voice, lower than I'd ever heard it, saying something I couldn't make out. I should have left, but I pushed the door open. They weren't kissing. Somehow, that made it worse. They were standing close, her hand on his chest, his hand covering hers. They were looking at each other the way people look when they're about to cross a line they've been circling for weeks. They jumped apart. Adrian's face went white. Vivian's expression flickered through surprise, calculation, and then said something like pity. "Chloe," Adrian said, and my name sounded like an apology he wasn't ready to make. I stood there with his coffee getting cold in my hand, and I waited for the explanation, the apology, the shame. Vivian spoke first. "This isn't what you think." "We were just talking," Adrian added quickly, "about the wedding, the stress of it all." And God, I was so stupid. I believed them. Or I forced myself to. Because the alternative was that my sister and my fiancé had betrayed me, and I couldn't survive that truth. So I accepted the lie. I apologized for interrupting. I left the coffee and walked out, my hands shaking so hard I had to grip the steering wheel for 10 minutes before I could drive. I never mentioned it, not to them, not to anyone. I buried it so deep I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. The wedding happened. Adrian was distracted at the altar, but he said his vows. Vivienne was my maid of honour, beautiful and supportive, giving a speech about sisterhood that made people cry. "Chloe has always been the heart of our family," she said, her voice warm and sincere. "The one who loves without condition, who gives without keeping score. I'm so grateful she found someone who sees how special she is." The guests applauded. Adrian squeezed my hand, and I smiled, because that's what I did. I smiled and pretended everything was fine. Our marriage lasted 14 months. Adrian grew distant, then cold, then absent. He stopped pretending to try. Meanwhile, Vivian's visits to our home increased. She'd drop by when Adrian was there staying for dinner, for drinks, for hours of conversation that excluded me, even when I sat right there. I'd bring them wine, and they'd barely acknowledge me. I'd cook elaborate meals, and Adrian would push the food around his plate, distracted. I'd try to join their conversations about design philosophy or urban planning, and they'd listen politely before continuing as if I hadn't spoken. I didn't confront it. I made excuses. I worked harder at being a better wife, cooking meals he didn't eat, planning dates he cancelled, trying to revive something that had been dead before it began. I lost weight. I stopped sleeping well. I started making mistakes at work, small ones that my manager noted in performance reviews. "You seem distracted, Chloe. Is everything all right at home?" "Everything was fine," I said. "I just needed to focus more." When Adrian finally asked for a divorce, I didn't fight it. I was too tired, too hollow. Part of me was almost relieved that the pretense was finally ending. "You're a good person, Chloe," he said, signing the papers in our lawyer's office. "You deserve someone who can love you the way you need." I wanted to ask why he'd married me if he couldn't be that person, but I didn't. I just nodded and signed my name. 3 months later, he and Vivian announced their relationship. My parents accepted it with surprising ease. "These things happen," my mother said, sitting in our family room, not quite meeting my eyes. "At least it's staying in the family. And you have to admit, they make sense together." Make sense. As if I'd never made sense. As if my marriage had been a mistake that was now being corrected. "Are you okay with this?" my father asked, and I could tell he wanted me to say yes. He wanted permission to be happy for Vivian without feeling guilty about me. "Of course," I said. "I want her to be happy." And I meant it. Because by then, I'd learned that my feelings didn't matter enough to inconvenience anyone else. I spent the next 5 years watching them build the life that was supposed to be mine. They got engaged at the same beach where Adrian had proposed to me. They travelled to Japan, to Morocco, to all the places on the list Adrian and I had made during those early hopeful days of our relationship. Vivian posted photos constantly, Adrian's hand on her waist at gallery openings, the two of them hiking in Patagonia, a shot of their intertwined fingers with her new engagement ring catching the light. The captions were always about gratitude, about finding your person, about how love comes when you least expect it. I liked every photo, commented sweet, supportive things, went to their engagement party and smiled until my face hurt. At family dinners, they'd show up together, perfectly coordinated, perfectly happy. They'd finish each other's sentences, they'd share inside jokes, and I'd sit there, the ghost at the table, serving wine and clearing plates and pretending I was fine. My mother would sometimes touch my arm and say, "You'll find someone too, darling, someone perfect for you." But we both knew she didn't believe it. I was 29 and divorced and working a mid-level job at the family company, while my sister was VP of International Operations. I was the failure, the cautionary tale, the daughter who hadn't quite worked out. I stopped dating, stopped trying. I worked late because there was nothing to go home to. I took on extra projects because at least at work, I could be useful even if I wasn't valued. I lost weight without meaning to. Stopped returning friends' calls because I had nothing to say. Spent weekends alone in my apartment, staring at walls, feeling myself disappear. At 29, I got sick. It started as a cold I ignored, then a cough that wouldn't quit. Then a fever I pushed through because there was a quarterly report due, and Vivian was giving a presentation to the board, and I needed to have the data ready. By the time I admitted I needed help, I had severe pneumonia. I drove myself to the hospital because I didn't want to bother anyone. I checked myself in alone because I didn't want to be a burden. They admitted me immediately. The doctor looked concerned. "Your oxygen levels are dangerously low. Do you have someone we can call?" I gave them my mother's number, but asked them not to call unless it was an emergency. She had enough to worry about. That night, my fever spiked to 104. The room spun. I couldn't breathe right. Somewhere far away, I heard alarms, heard nurses rushing, heard someone saying my name with urgency. And in that moment, floating somewhere between consciousness and oblivion, I had a thought so clear it cut through the fever haze. I was going to die having never lived as myself. I was going to die as the supporting character in Vivian's story, the consolation prize no one wanted to claim. I closed my eyes on that thought, and part of me hoped I wouldn't open them again. When I opened them, I was 22 years old, sitting in my college apartment, staring at a calendar that read February 2019. The first thing I felt was my heartbeat. Strong, steady, young. The second thing I felt was rage. Not the hot, explosive kind. Something colder, something that settled into my bones like permafrost and whispered, "Never again." I sat up slowly, looking at hands that didn't ache, breathing air that didn't rattle in my chest. My laptop was open to a paper I remembered writing, an analysis of emerging markets in Southeast Asia. I'd gotten a B+ on it. Professor Morrison had written, "Good work, but lacks conviction." He'd been right. Everything I did lacked conviction because I was too busy trying to fit into spaces that were never meant for me. I checked the date, February 14th, 2019, 2 months before I'd meet Adrian at the charity gala. 3 years before Vivienne would return from Singapore. An entire life spread before me like a map where I finally knew all the roads that led to ruin. I opened my laptop and looked at my paper. Then I deleted every word and started over. The transformation wasn't dramatic. I didn't suddenly become someone else. I simply stopped being someone I'd never actually been. When my mother called to ask if I'd attend Vivienne's award ceremony in New York, I said no. Not with an excuse, not with apology, just no. But she's your sister, my mother said, confused. She'll be disappointed. I have exam, I said, which was true but had never stopped me before. Can't you reschedule? She specifically asked if you'd be there. No, I said simply. I need to focus on my own work right now. The silence on the other end told me this was unexpected. In my previous life, I'd flown to New York, missed 2 exams, and spent the weekend watching Vivienne accept accolades while I applauded from the audience. This time, I stayed in Boston and aced my exams. I stopped answering Vivienne's texts immediately. I'd respond hours later, days later, sometimes not at all. I stopped asking about her life, stopped volunteering information about mine. When she noticed, and she did notice, because people like Vivienne notice when their audience dwindles, I was polite but distant. Are you okay? She asked during one of her rare visits home. You seem different. I'm fine, I said, just focused on school. You're always focused on school. I'm talking about us. You barely talk to me anymore. We're talking now, I pointed out. She frowned. You know what I mean. You used to tell me everything. Now it's like pulling teeth to get anything out of you. I considered telling her the truth, that I'd never actually told her everything. I'd just performed openness while she half listened, waiting for her turn to talk about herself. But there was no point. I guess I'm just growing up, I said, becoming more independent. She didn't like that answer. I could see it in the way her mouth tightened. But what could she say? That I wasn't allowed to be independent? It wasn't a lie. I was focused. But not on being the student I'd been before. The one who studied hard enough to pass, but never hard enough to threaten Vivienne's shine. I changed my major from business to economics and data science. I stayed up late learning programming languages I'd never bothered with before. I joined a research group studying global tech infrastructure and discovered I had a talent for pattern recognition that no one, including me, had ever noticed. Professor Morrison called me to his office after I submitted my revised paper. This is extraordinary work, Chloe, he said, looking at me like he'd never seen me before. Have you considered graduate school? This is PhD level analysis. The old me would have laughed it off, made self-deprecating jokes, insisted I wasn't that smart. The new me said, yes, I'm applying to MIT and Stanford's econ programs. I'd be happy to write you a recommendation, he said. This is genuinely impressive. I thanked him and left his office, feeling something I'd never felt before. Pride in myself that had nothing to do with anyone else's approval. I graduated summa cum laude. Vivienne came to the ceremony, and I saw the flicker of surprise in her eyes when they called my name with honours, when the dean mentioned my research had been published in an academic journal, when Professor Morrison pulled me aside afterward to introduce me to colleagues from MIT and Stanford. She hugged me afterward, and for the first time, I felt nothing. Not resentment, not longing, just the mild awareness of being touched by a stranger. I'm so proud of you, she said, and I heard the uncertainty in her voice. She was proud, but she was also confused. This wasn't supposed to be how the story went. Thank you, I replied, and moved on to hug my parents. My father actually looked impressed. MIT, huh? That's quite an achievement. Chloe's always been smart, my mother said quickly, as if defending me against an accusation no one had made. We knew she could do well if she applied herself. I smiled and said nothing. Let them rewrite history if it made them comfortable. The charity gala happened exactly as I remembered. April 16, 29, I wore a different dress this time. Red instead of pale pink, elegant instead of sweet. I saw Adrian across the room. Tall, intense, that same look of artistic brooding that had captivated me before. He was studying the building's architecture, making notes on his phone. In my first life, I'd approached him. I'd asked a tentative question about the ceiling beams, and he'd lit up, and we talked for 2 hours. This time, I walked past him to the bar. I felt his eyes follow me, felt the moment he decided to approach. I ordered a gin and tonic and waited. "That's interesting," he said, appearing beside me. I turned, polite but uninterested. "What is?" "You're the only person in this room who looked at the architecture and then walked away. Most people either don't notice or can't stop talking about it once they do." "Maybe I noticed and simply don't feel the need to comment on everything I observe," I said. He blinked, then smiled. That devastating smile. "I'm Adrian. Adrian Chen Li." "I know," I said. "Your firm designed the Thompson Center downtown. Interesting use of negative space, though the acoustics must be problematic." His smile widened. "You've been inside?" "I make it my business to know things," I said, and excused myself before he could respond. I felt him watching me the rest of the night. 3 times he tried to approach. 3 times I was engaged in conversation with someone else, laughing at something they'd said, completely absorbed in something that wasn't him. When I left, I didn't look back. I'd already forgotten his face. He found me on LinkedIn the next day, sent a message about meeting for coffee to discuss architectural acoustics and their impact on urban planning. I waited 4 days to respond, then declined politely. "I was very busy with graduate school applications," I said. "Perhaps another time." That time never came. He sent 2 more messages over the following month. I left them unread. MIT accepted me with a full scholarship and a research position with Professor Klein, one of the leading experts in global financial systems. I moved to Boston in August, and it felt like shedding a skin I'd been forced to wear too long. Vivian called when she heard. "MIT? Chloe, that's incredible. I didn't even know you'd applied." "There's a lot you don't know about me," I said pleasantly. A pause. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing. Just that we've been living separate lives. It's natural you wouldn't know everything I'm doing. We're sisters. We should know what's happening in each other's lives." "Should we?" I asked. "Or why?" "Because that's what family does." "I think family means different things to different people," I said. "For some people, it's staying closely involved. For others, it's respecting boundaries and letting each other grow independently." "Boundaries," she repeated. "When did you start talking like a therapy? Pamphlet?" "When I started understanding what I need to be healthy," I said. She was quiet for a long moment. "Mom wants us to do dinner when you're home for Thanksgiving." "I won't be home for Thanksgiving. I'm doing research with Professor Klein's team. It's a great opportunity." "You're not coming home for Thanksgiving?" She sounded genuinely shocked. "No." "Chloe, it's Thanksgiving. It's family. And I'm building a career. Sometimes those things conflict." "They don't have to conflict. You're choosing to make them conflict." "Yes," I agreed. "I'm choosing. Maybe for the first time in my life, I'm actually choosing what I want instead of what's expected." "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing. I hope you have a nice Thanksgiving." I ended the call before she could respond. I built a life in Boston that had nothing to do with being Montgomery's second daughter. I worked with brilliant people who knew nothing about my family, who judged me purely on my work. I published 2 papers before the end of my first year. I presented at conferences where people listened to me because my research was valuable. not because they were being polite. I learned to code at professional levels. I learned quantitative analysis. I learned to see patterns in data that told stories about human behavior, market shifts, technological evolution. I dated casually, never seriously, never anyone who made me feel like I should diminish myself to fit their expectations. A PhD student named James, who made me laugh, a visiting professor from London who taught me about wine, a software engineer named Maya who kissed me at a New Year's party and taught me that attraction was more fluid than I'd thought. None of them lasted, but that was fine. I was learning what I wanted, who I was when no one was watching, what it felt like to take up space without apologising. I learned, most importantly, to be alone without being lonely. Vivian's texts grew less frequent. My mother's calls became monthly instead of weekly. My father sent brief emails about company performance, as if I were a distant shareholder instead of his daughter. I let them drift, not with anger, with indifference. They had never really seen me anyway. In December 2020, a tech startup approached me about joining as their chief data officer. They were building infrastructure for decentralized finance systems, risky and cutting edge. The old Chloe would never have left her PhD program, would never have taken such a risk. The new me negotiated a substantial equity package and moved to Seattle 2 weeks later. That's when I heard about Adrian and Vivian. My mother called, her voice careful. Vivian's been seeing someone. It's serious. I was debugging code when she called. I put her on speaker. That's nice. It's Adrian Chen Lee, the architect. You met him once, I think, at that charity gala? I didn't miss a beat. The name sounds familiar. Good for her. You're really okay with this? I was genuinely confused. Why wouldn't I be? Because in this life, Adrian was nothing to me. A man I'd spoken to once at a gala years ago. A person who'd tried to get my attention and failed. The thought of him with Vivian didn't register as betrayal. It barely registered at all. Oh, my mother said, clearly thrown. I just thought, never mind. You'll meet him at Christmas, probably. I won't be home for Christmas, I said. We're launching a new protocol in January. It's a critical time. She sighed. You're always so busy, Chloe. I barely know what's happening in your life anymore. I'm building something, I said. Something important. Something mine. Well, I suppose that's good. Your father and I just worry. Don't, I interrupted gently. I'm fine. Better than fine. I'm exactly where I need to be. After we hung up, I went back to my code, Adrian and Vivian. It made sense, in a way. They deserved each other, two people who needed constant admiration, constant validation. They'd probably be very happy together. I felt nothing about it, and that absence of feeling was the greatest gift I'd ever given myself. The startup exploded. Not failed, exploded with success. Our protocols were adopted by 3 major financial institutions in the first year. By the second year, we were fielding acquisition offers from companies 10 times our size. By the third, when we sold, I was wealthy enough to never work again if I chose. I chose to work. I took the payout and started my own consulting firm, helping companies build secure, innovative financial infrastructure. I travelled constantly: Singapore, London, Dubai, Tokyo. I collected experiences instead of trying to collect approval. I hired a team of brilliant minds. We took on projects that interested us, turned down ones that didn't, built a reputation for being selective but excellent. I learned to negotiate without softening my demands. I learned to say no without explaining. I learned to take up space like I belonged there, because I did. Vivian got engaged to Adrian in spring 2022. My mother sent photos of the proposal, some beach in Maldives, very romantic, very expensive. Isn't it beautiful? She texted. Very aesthetic, I replied, because it was. and because I felt nothing. I sent an expensive gift and a polite note. I did not attend the engagement party. Chloe's travelling for work, I heard Vivian tell someone on a family call I'd been conference called into, without warning. She's become so successful, we barely see her anymore. There was something in her voice, not quite resentment, but close. The first hint that my absence had shifted from concerning to threatening. Well, she's building an empire, my father said, and I heard the note of surprise in his voice. He'd never expected this from me. The sweet daughter, the forgettable one. Still, Vivian said, family should come first sometimes. I think Chloe is making her own choices about priorities, my mother said carefully. We have to respect that. I almost laughed. Respect. They'd never respected my choices before, but success changed things, made people reconsider, made them wonder if maybe they'd missed something. The wedding was planned for November 2023. I was invited, obviously. The invitation came with a handwritten note from Vivian. I know we've grown apart, but you're still my sister. I can't imagine getting married without you there. Please say you'll come. Please. The please was interesting. Vivian didn't beg, but she was begging now, in her own way. I waited a week before responding. I'll check my schedule. She called immediately. What does that mean? You'll check your schedule, Chloe? It's 8 months away. Surely you can plan around it. I have a lot of commitments, I said. I'll let you know. This is my wedding. I understand that. Do you? Her voice was sharp now. Do you understand, or do you just not care? I care that you're happy, I said truthfully, but my attendance at your wedding isn't required for your happiness. You'll have hundreds of people there who love you. You won't miss me. You're my sister, and I'm not saying no. I'm saying I'll let you know. That should be enough. It wasn't enough. She wanted certainty. She wanted me to prioritize her again. She wanted the old Chloe back, the one who would have moved mountains to be there, that Chloe was dead. The requests became more insistent over the following months. My mother, my father in his gruff way. Even Adrian sent a personal note about how much it would mean to Vivian. I waited until 6 weeks before the wedding to RSVP. I'm sorry, I told Vivian over the phone. I have a conference in Seoul that week. It's been scheduled for months. I can't cancel. Chloe. Her voice was sharp now, angry. This is my wedding. My wedding, not just another event. I know, and I'm sorry I'll miss it. I'll send something nice. You're choosing work over family, again. I'm choosing my commitments over optional attendance, I corrected. There's a difference. Optional, she laughed, bitter and disbelieving. God, when did you become so cold? I'm not cold. I'm just no longer warm in the specific way you need me to be. What the hell does that mean? It means I hope you have a beautiful wedding. It means I genuinely wish you happiness. But it also means I don't owe you my presence just because you want it. I'm your sister, yes, and I'm not rejecting you. I'm just not organising my life around you anymore. That shouldn't be threatening, unless the only way you value me is through my availability. Silence, long and heavy. Then, fuck you, Chloe. She'd never cursed at me before, never let the mask slip like that. I'm sorry you feel that way, I said calmly. I really do hope you have a wonderful wedding. I hung up before she could respond. I didn't go to the conference in Seoul. I spent that week in a cabin in Vermont, reading and hiking and enjoying the quiet. I posted nothing on social media. I told no one where I was. My phone filled with messages during the wedding weekend. Angry ones from Vivian, disappointed ones from my parents, an oddly formal one from Adrian asking if there was something wrong between me and Vivian that they should know about. I responded to none of them. I was unreachable, unattached, unbothered. I thought about them occasionally. Vivian in whatever gorgeous dress she'd chosen, Adrian looking handsome and serious, my parents beaming with pride. The ceremony I'd once thought would be mine, now hers. And I felt nothing. No regret, no jealousy, no grief. Just the deep, quiet satisfaction of knowing I was exactly where I wanted to be. When I finally replied 3 days after their wedding, I sent a simple text to the family group chat. Sorry, I was in the mountains and had no service. Congratulations to Vivian and Adrian. Wishing you both happiness. Polite, distant, utterly disengaged. That's when it started. The unravelling I'd been waiting for without quite realising I was waiting. Vivian called, and for the first time I heard uncertainty in her voice. Chloe, we need to talk, really talk. About what? About this distance, this coldness. I don't understand what I did wrong. I almost laughed. You didn't do anything wrong, Vivian. We're just living different lives now. But we're sisters. Yes, I agreed. We are, and I wish you well. But I don't owe you more than that. Owe me? This isn't about owing, isn't it? I asked gently. You want me to show up, to be present, to maintain the relationship. But what have you ever given me besides a role to play in your story? When was the last time you asked about my life and actually listened to the answer? When have you ever made space for me that wasn't in service of making yourself feel like a good sister? That's not fair. It's completely fair. You never asked what I wanted, Vivian. You never noticed who I was. You just wanted an audience, and I'm no longer available for that position. She was crying now. I could hear it in her breathing. Part of me, some ancient conditioned part, wanted to comfort her. But I had learned to distinguish between cruelty and boundary, and this was the latter. I love you, she said, and it sounded like a plea, like negotiation. I believe you love the version of me that makes you feel like a good sister, I said, the one who showed up and admired you and never outshone you. But that person was a performance. She wasn't real, and I can't keep performing her just to make you comfortable. So what? You just stop being my sister? I never stopped being your sister. I stopped being your mirror. There's a difference. I don't understand, she whispered. I know, I said, not unkindly. And that's okay. You don't have to understand. Hope you and Adrian are very happy together, truly. But I need you to let me go now. Let you go, Chloe. I need you to stop expecting me to fill a role I never auditioned for. I need you to accept that I have a life that has nothing to do with you, and that's not a rejection. It's just reality. I ended the call. My parents demanded a family meeting. I agreed to a video call, nothing more. When they asked me to come home to work this out, I declined. There's nothing to work out, I said. I'm simply living my life. Vivian is living hers. We don't need to be close to be civil. But your family, my father said, frustrated in a way I'd never seen before. My absence had become a problem he couldn't solve. Yes, and I'm not rejecting family. I'm rejecting a dynamic where my value is measured by my availability to serve someone else's narrative. My mother looked bewildered, hurt. When did you become so hard? I'm not hard. I'm solid. There's a difference. I'm not brittle or defensive or angry. I'm just clear about what I will and won't accept in my life. And constant emotional labour in service of making Vivian feel important is on the won't accept list. That's a horrible thing to say, my mother said, her voice trembling. Is it? I asked, or is it just honest? You raised me to believe my job was to make everyone else comfortable. And I did that job perfectly for 22 years. But I'm done now. I'm allowed to be done. My father cleared his throat. You're being selfish, Chloe. Yes, I agreed. I am. And I've discovered I'm very good at it. They didn't know what to do with that. With a daughter who wouldn't apologise for prioritising herself, who wouldn't shrink back into the box that they'd built for her. We ended the call with nothing resolved because there was nothing to resolve. They wanted me to change back. I had no intention of ever going back. Adrian called me 6 months after the wedding. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. Chloe, he said, I know this is unexpected, but I need to understand something. What's that? Why you're doing this to Vivian? She's heartbroken. She doesn't understand why you've cut her off. I haven't cut her off, I said. I've simply stopped prioritising her above myself. That's not what it looks like from here. How it looks from there isn't my responsibility, Adrian. He was quiet for a moment. Then, I saw you that night, at the gala years ago. I tried to talk to you. I remember. You barely looked at me. I had no reason to look longer. Why? He sounded almost hurt, almost confused. What did I do? This was the moment. The moment where the old me would have spilled everything, the betrayal, the pain, the alternate timeline where he'd destroyed me. But that timeline didn't exist for him. In this life, he'd simply married a woman who wanted him. There was no crime in that. You did nothing, Adrian. You're just not particularly interesting to me. You never were. But Vivian said you two used to be so close. Vivian remembers what served her. I remember what was real. Those are different things. She loves you, he said. I know, and I don't hate her, if that's what you're asking. I'm just indifferent. She can't accept that, which makes her think I'm punishing her. But I'm not. I'm simply living a life where she doesn't matter more than anyone else. That's cold, Chloe. No, I said. It's free. I heard him exhale slowly. You've changed. No, I corrected. I've stopped pretending to be who you all needed me to be. This was always here. You just never bothered to look. Over the next 2 years, I watched from a comfortable distance as my absence continued to affect them in ways I never anticipated. Vivian's social media posts became less frequent, more curated, like she was trying to prove something to an audience that was no longer watching. She'd tag me occasionally in family photos from years past, captioned with things like, missing these days and sisters forever. I never responded, not out of cruelty, but because there was nothing to say. Those days were gone, and I didn't miss them. My parents tried to force proximity, inviting both of us to holidays with the expectation that physical presence would heal whatever they thought was broken. I went to Christmas 2024. I was polite, pleasant, utterly unreachable emotionally. I asked Vivienne polite questions about her work. I complimented Adrian's recent project. I talked with my parents about their health and retirement plans. I gave them the dinner table version of myself, the one that smiled and passed dishes and laughed at safe jokes. But when Vivian tried to get me alone, tried to have a real conversation, I checked my phone and said I had a call with Tokyo. Can't it wait? She asked, and I heard the desperation underneath. No, I said simply, and left the room. I saw her face crumble. Saw Adrian put his arm around her. Saw my mother shoot me a look that was half disappointment, half something else. Fear, maybe. Fear that she'd lost me and didn't know how. They had lost me, but not recently. They'd never really had me to begin with. Last month, Vivian sent me a long email. It rambled, circling around hurt and confusion, trying to pinpoint when things changed, asking what she'd done to deserve my abandonment. I read it twice, then wrote back. You didn't do anything to deserve it, Vivienne. That's what you can't seem to understand. I didn't pull away because you hurt me. I pulled away because I outgrew the need to orbit you. You keep looking for a wound you inflicted, some moment you can apologize for, some way to fix this. But there's nothing broken. I simply chose to build a life where your approval isn't my currency. I hope you can accept that someday. I hope you can let me be free without taking it personally. But if you can't, that's okay too. It won't change. Anything. She hasn't responded. Maybe she will, maybe she won't. Either way, I'll be fine. I'm 33 now, in this life. 4 years past the point where I died before. My company has offices in 6 countries. I've been featured in Forbes and Bloomberg. I sit on advisory boards for organisations working on financial inclusion in developing economies. I've dated interesting people, loved a few of them, walked away when it stopped serving me. I have a life that is entirely, completely mine. Sometimes I stand at windows in different cities, Singapore, London, Dubai, and think about the woman I was, the one who died alone in a hospital, unmourned and unseen. I think about how close I came to accepting that as my fate, and then I think about the woman I am now, the one who chose herself, who walked away without explanation or apology, who learned that indifference, not revenge, is the ultimate freedom. I didn't destroy them by walking away. I didn't need to. Their need for my validation, for my participation in their story, was always their weakness, not my responsibility. Sometimes my mother texts, "When are you coming home?" And I think, I am home. Wherever I am, I'm finally home. Because home isn't a place or a family that never saw you. Home is the quiet certainty that you belong to yourself, that you owe no one access to your life beyond what you freely choose to give. They can have their perfect photos, their family dinners, their carefully constructed narratives where they're the victims of my coldness. I have something better. I have myself, whole, unborrowed, undiminished. And I never had to say a word to claim it. The freedom isn't in the leaving. It's in realizing you were never actually there to begin with. You were just waiting for permission to exist. And the greatest rebellion is giving yourself that permission, then walking away from everyone who needed you small. I don't know if they'll ever understand. I don't need them to. I'm standing at my office window in Singapore right now, watching the sun set over a city that knows nothing of who I was supposed to be. My phone buzzes with another family invitation I might or might not accept, and I smile because the choice is mine. Finally, completely mine.